I am 73 years old. For 40 of those years, I carried a title that most people only ever hear in movies: Diocesan Exorcist. That means I was the priest the church called when everything else had failed, when the doctors had no answers, when the psychiatrists had exhausted their medications, when a family had nowhere left to go. I was the last door they knocked on, and for 4 decades I opened it. I want you to understand what that authority felt like before I tell you what I witnessed, because what I am about to describe only makes sense if you first understand how completely I had stopped believing that anything could surprise me. If what I am about to say reaches even one person who needs to hear it, if one family finds something in this testimony that brings them closer to the truth, then I ask you simply to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. These words are not easy to say, but they have been waiting inside me for 31 years, and they belong to the world now, not to me. I grew up in a small city in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the church was not a building you visited on Sunday. It was the architecture of everything: the way people spoke to each other, the way they buried their dead, the way they explained the things they could not explain. My father was a high school history teacher. My mother sang in the choir every week without fail for 40 years. We were not a family that questioned the faith. We were a family that lived inside it the way you live inside a house, without thinking about the walls. I was ordained in 1981. I was 26 years old, and I believed, with the total conviction of a young man who has never been seriously wrong, that I had been called to something real, something sacred. The priesthood felt like coming home to a place I had never actually been. By 1989, I had been assigned as the diocesan exorcist for a region covering parts of rural Appalachia, small communities, isolated farms, towns where people still spoke about the spiritual world the way their grandparents had, with direct, unsentimental certainty. I performed the rite of exorcism formally perhaps 8 or 10 times a year. Most of what I did was pastoral counseling with a religious framework, sitting with people who were frightened, validating suffering that no institution had taken seriously, praying with families who had no one else willing to stay in the room with them. I had seen things that unsettled me. I had seen what severe psychiatric illness looks like from the inside of a farmhouse kitchen at 2 in the morning. I had seen grief manifest in ways that looked, to an untrained eye, like something darker. I had learned to be careful, methodical, to discount 90% of what I saw and take the remaining 10% seriously. I had stopped being surprised. That is the condition I was in when the call came in November of 1992. The family's name was Calloway. They lived on a working farm about 30 miles outside the nearest town. The father, Thomas, had called the diocese 3 times before anyone returned his call. He was not a dramatic man. He was the kind of man who used words sparingly, the way you use anything you've learned not to waste. When I finally spoke with him, he said only, "Something is wrong with my daughter, and it has been wrong for 4 months, and we do not know what to do anymore." The daughter's name was Mara. She was 7 years old. I drove out on a Thursday evening. The road narrowed as I got closer to the property, the kind of narrowing that feels deliberate, like the land itself is asking you to reconsider. The farmhouse was plain. White clapboard, green shutters, a porch with 2 wooden chairs. Thomas met me at the door. His wife, Ellen, was standing slightly behind him in the hallway with her arms crossed over her chest, not defensively, but the way a person holds themselves together when they have been holding themselves together for a very long time. They told me what had been happening over coffee at the kitchen table. It had started in July. Mara had begun waking in the night. Not screaming, That was the thing that made Thomas choose his words so carefully when he described it. Not screaming, talking, in a voice that was not her voice. At first, they had thought she was dreaming. They had gone into her room and found her sitting upright in bed with her eyes open and her hands flat on the blanket, speaking in long, unbroken sentences. They could not understand what she was saying. They had taken her to the family doctor. He had found nothing wrong. They had taken her to a pediatric specialist 2 hours away. Blood work, neurological screening, all of it clean. They had spoken to their parish priest, who had prayed with the family, and quietly suggested they might benefit from speaking with someone who handled these kinds of situations with more experience. That was why I was sitting at their kitchen table. I asked if I could hear a recording. Thomas went to a back room and came back with a small cassette recorder, the kind people used for dictation. He set it on the table between us and pressed play. I want to be precise about what I heard, because I have spent 31 years being precise about it. The voice on the recording was not a child's voice in any register I recognized as normal for a 7-year-old. It was Mara's voice. I would hear her speak later that evening, and I could hear the connection, but lowered, slowed, and structured in a way that children's speech simply is not structured. No fragmentation, no searching for words. Long, complex sentences delivered with the cadence of someone who had been speaking for a very long time and had complete confidence in every word. But that was not what stopped me. What stopped me was the language. I had studied theology for 6 years. I had read patristic texts in their original forms. I knew enough Latin to conduct the formal rite from memory, and the language on that recording was not modern. It was not the ecclesiastical Latin I had learned in seminary. It was something older, something with a grammatical structure and a phonemic pattern that I recognized in the way you recognize a face you haven't seen in decades, imprecisely, with a jolt before the conscious mind has caught up. It took me until the following morning, after I had driven home and spent 3 hours with my reference texts, to identify with confidence what I had heard. It was a form of Aramaic, not modern Aramaic, a liturgical variant that had not been in common spoken use for over 1,000 years. Mara Calloway was 7 years old. She had grown up on a farm in rural Appalachia. She had not been abroad. She had not, to her parents' knowledge, ever encountered any text or recording in any ancient language. Her father read the newspaper. Her mother read paperback novels. They had a television and a radio. There was no mechanism I could construct, no explanation I could assemble from the ordinary materials of a child's world for what was on that tape. I went back the following morning. Mara was small. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's careful way of sitting, very still, very composed, as if she had learned early that being still was a form of safety. She looked at me without the particular shyness most children her age had around strangers. She looked at me the way very old people sometimes look at things, with patience and with something that was not quite recognition but was adjacent to it. I conducted the assessment slowly. I spent an hour simply talking with her, about her daily life, about the farm, about what she liked and what she was afraid of. She was articulate and thoughtful in the way that occasionally appears in children who have spent a great deal of time around adults. And then, near the end of our conversation, she stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me with an expression I cannot accurately describe in any vocabulary I have. It was not distress. It was not anger. It was closer to clarity, like a curtain being drawn back. And then she spoke. Not in English, not in anything a 7-year-old girl in 1992 should have had access to. She spoke for perhaps 45 seconds, continuous, fluid, with the intonation and rhythm of someone delivering a message they had been entrusted with and had been waiting to deliver for a very long time. When she stopped, she blinked. And then she looked at me again with her own eyes, the composed, curious 7-year-old eyes, and she said quietly, in English, "Did you understand? I told her I was still working on it." That was not entirely the truth. I had caught perhaps a third of what she said, and what I had caught, what I later confirmed with a scholar of ancient Syriac dialects at a university 3 states away, to whom I sent a written transcription without explanation or context, was this: the child had said that the one who carries the oil does not heal himself, that the words spoken over others return to the one who speaks them, that what is buried in the name of protection becomes the weight that prevents the protector from standing upright. I have turned those sentences over in my mind every single day for 31 years. I performed no formal rite that weekend. I sat with the family. I prayed with them. I told Thomas and Ellen that their daughter was not in danger, that I could say with confidence, and I have never retracted it. The episodes diminished over the following 2 months and stopped entirely before spring. I never found an explanation that satisfied me. I looked for one. I spent months looking. I consulted linguists and theologians and one neurologist who specialized in unusual speech presentations in pediatric patients. I read every documented case of xenoglossy, the phenomenon of speaking in an unlearned language, that had been academically recorded. None of the documented cases matched what I had witnessed in the specificity of the language, the complexity of the syntax, or the coherence of the content. What I am left with, at 73, after 40 years of standing in rooms where people were at the absolute edge of what they could bear, is something I would not have been willing to say at 40. Something the institution I served would not have wanted me to say at any age. I do not know what happened in that farmhouse. I do not know what moved through a 7-year-old girl in rural Appalachia and chose to speak in the liturgical language of the early church. I do not know whether it was sacred or neurological or something the human mind has not yet built adequate language to describe, but I know what she said. I know that it was true, and I know that the weight she described, the weight that prevents the protector from standing upright, I have felt it. I have felt it in every room where I performed a rite I was uncertain about, in every family I sent away with prayers when they needed something more, in every year I spent building a life inside an institution without asking the institution the questions it most needed to be asked. If you are still watching, and I hope you are, I want to say something directly to you before I finish. What I witnessed that November should have undone me, and in some ways it did, not the way collapse undoes a person, the way clarity does, slowly, at the foundations, until the things you built your authority on begin to feel less like bedrock and more like assumption. I am not asking you to believe what I have told you. I am asking you to hold it, to take it seriously, the way you would take seriously anything told to you by an old man who has nothing left to protect. If this testimony means something to you, if Mara's words reach you the way they reached me, please subscribe to this channel and make sure the notification bell is turned on so that when the next voice speaks, you will be there to hear it. These testimonies exist because silence has already cost too much. The child asked me if I had understood. 31 years later, I think I am finally beginning to.